It started with little things, late nights at work, unexplained absences, and a sudden distance between us. At first, I told myself it was stress. She had always been ambitious, driven, and maybe her job was finally taking its toll. But as the days turned into weeks, the excuses piled up, and the gaps in her stories grew wider. I noticed the way she avoided my eyes when she came home, the way her phone was always face down on the table, the way she flinched when I touched her, as if my hands were a reminder of something she no longer wanted. I wasn't stupid. I could feel the shift in the air, the way the energy between us had changed. Something was wrong, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The first real crack appeared one evening when she came home late, her hair slightly disheveled and her lipstick smudged. She claimed she'd been stuck in a meeting, but I could smell the faint trace of cologne on her clothes, a scent that wasn't mine. My stomach churned, but I said nothing. Instead, I watched her carefully, studying her every move, every word, every gesture. The more I paid attention, the more I saw the signs. The way she'd suddenly start dressing up for work, even though she claimed her job was just paperwork. The way she'd disappear into the bathroom for hours, texting someone who wasn't me. The way she'd laugh at her phone, only to quickly silence it when I walked into the room. I tried to convince myself I was overthinking it. Maybe she was just going through a phase. Maybe she needed space. Maybe it was all in my head. But deep down, I knew better. Betrayal isn't just a feeling, it's a storm that consumes everything in its path. And I could feel the storm brewing, dark and relentless, ready to destroy everything I thought I knew about us. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. She had fallen asleep on the couch, her phone resting on the coffee table. My heart pounded as I reached for it, my fingers trembling as I entered her passcode, our anniversary. A cruel irony that didn't escape me. The screen lit up, and there it was, a text from him. The words blurred as I read them, my chest tightening with every sentence. It wasn't just an affair. It was a full-blown relationship, complete with inside jokes, plans for the future, and declarations of love. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, the air ripped from my lungs. This wasn't just a fling. This was something real, something she had chosen over me. I sat there in the dark, the glow of her phone illuminating my face, and I realized something. I wasn't just hurt. I was angry. Furious, even. How could she do this to me? How could she throw away everything we'd built for someone else? I wanted to scream, to shake her awake, and demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I put her phone back exactly where I found it, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. I wasn't going to be the victim here. I wasn't going to let her destroy me without a fight. Over the next few days, I played the part of the oblivious husband perfectly. I smiled when she lied about working late. I nodded when she made excuses for her sudden girls' nights. I even cooked her favorite meals, pretending not to notice the way she picked at her food, her mind clearly elsewhere. Every smile I gave her was a mask, every kind word a calculated move. I wanted her to feel safe, to believe she'd gotten away with it. But inside, I was a volcano, simmering with rage and planning my next move. I started paying closer attention to her routines, memorizing her schedule, and noting every inconsistency. I began to piece together the puzzle, connecting the dots between her lies and the truth she was so desperately trying to hide. And as the picture became clearer, so did my plan. She thought she was in control, that she could have her cake and eat it too. But she had no idea what was coming. No idea that the man she thought was weak, the man she thought she could manipulate, was about to turn the tables on her in the most devastating way possible. The storm was coming, and I was ready to unleash it. I let her think she had me fooled. I became the perfect cuckold husband, doting, oblivious, and utterly predictable. Every morning I'd kiss her goodbye as she left for work, pretending not to notice the extra time she spent on her makeup or the way she sprayed on a new perfume that wasn't for me. I'd text her throughout the day, asking how her meetings were going, feigning concern when she replied hours later with vague excuses. I played my role so well that even I started to wonder if I was overreacting, if maybe I was just imagining the signs. But then I'd catch a glimpse of her phone lighting up with his name, or hear her whispering sweet nothings to him in the other room, and the reality would come crashing back. I made sure to give her all the space she needed, never questioning her late nights or sudden errands. When she came home smelling like someone else's cologne, I'd simply ask if she wanted dinner, acting as though I hadn't noticed. I even started suggesting she take time for herself, encouraging her to go out with friends or treat herself to a spa day. She ate it up, thinking I was just being supportive, not realizing that every suggestion was a calculated move to give her more rope to hang herself with. The more freedom I gave her, the more reckless she became, and the easier it was for me to gather the evidence I needed. I remember one particular evening when she came home late, her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright with excitement. She told me she'd been at a work event, but I could see the lie written all over her face. Instead of calling her out, I smiled and asked how it went, listening intently as she spun a web of half-truths and fabricated details. Inside, I was seething, but on the surface, I was the picture of a loving, trusting husband. I even complimented her dress, telling her how beautiful she looked, all while imagining the moment she'd realize just how badly she'd underestimated me. As the days turned into weeks, I began to notice subtle changes in her behavior. She became bolder, more careless, as if she no longer felt the need to hide her affair. She'd take calls in front of me, laughing and flirting with him while I sat just a few feet away, pretending to be engrossed in a book or a TV show. She'd leave her phone unlocked on the counter, her messages to him displayed for anyone to see. It was as if she wanted me to find out, as if she was daring me to confront her. But I didn't take the bait. Instead, I played along, letting her believe she was untouchable. I started documenting everything: her late nights, her unexplained absences, the times she'd come home with her clothes slightly disheveled or her hair a mess. I took screenshots of her messages, recorded her phone calls, and even followed her a few times to confirm my suspicions. Each piece of evidence was like a dagger to my heart, but I forced myself to stay focused. This wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about making sure she paid for what she'd done. I wanted her to feel the same pain she'd inflicted on me, to understand the consequences of her betrayal. There were moments when I almost slipped up, when the anger and hurt threatened to consume me. I'd catch myself staring at her across the dinner table, my hands clenched into fists under the table, and I'd have to remind myself to stay calm, to keep playing the part. It wasn't easy, pretending to be the oblivious husband while my world was falling apart. But I knew I had to stay strong, to keep my emotions in check until the time was right. One night, she came home later than usual, her hair tangled and her clothes wrinkled. She tried to sneak past me, but I was waiting in the living room, a glass of wine in hand. I asked her how her evening was, my voice calm and steady, and she froze for a moment before forcing a smile and telling me she'd been at a friend's house. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but inside, I was boiling. I could see the guilt in her eyes, the way she avoided my gaze, and I knew she was lying, but I didn't say a word. Instead, I poured her a glass of wine and told her to relax, acting as though everything was fine. As I watched her sip her wine, her hands trembling slightly, I realized just how far I'd come. I wasn't the same man I'd been a few months ago, the man who would have confronted her, begged her to tell the truth, and tried to salvage what was left of our marriage. No, I was someone else now, someone colder, harder, and far more dangerous. She thought she was in control, that she could have her affair and keep me in the dark, but she was wrong, dead wrong. And soon, she'd find out just how badly she'd underestimated me. I started digging. The moment I realized the depth of her betrayal, I knew I couldn't just sit back and let her destroy me. I needed answers, concrete proof of what she was doing behind my back. So I hired a private investigator, a man who specialized in uncovering secrets. I gave him her schedule, her habits, and the little details I'd noticed over the weeks. He was efficient, methodical, and within days, he had the evidence I needed: photos of her with him, timestamps of their meetings, and even recordings of their conversations. Each piece of evidence was like a knife to the chest, but I forced myself to look at it, to absorb every detail. This wasn't just about catching her in the act, it was about understanding the full extent of her betrayal. But I didn't stop there. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, to understand the pain she'd caused me. So I began to plant the seeds of her destruction. I started by leaking small bits of information to her lover's wife, anonymous tips that would make her suspicious. I sent her photos of them together, taken from a distance, with no identifiable source. I wanted her to question everything, to feel the same doubt and insecurity that had been eating away at me. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Her lover's wife began to confront him, their arguments spilling out into public spaces. I watched from the shadows, my satisfaction growing with each passing day. Next, I turned my attention to their social circle. I created fake social media accounts, using them to spread rumors about their affair. I made sure the rumors were vague enough to be believable but specific enough to cause damage. Soon, their friends were whispering behind their backs, their once solid relationships crumbling under the weight of suspicion. I even went as far as to send anonymous messages to their employers, hinting at inappropriate behavior. It wasn't long before their professional lives began to unravel, their reputations tarnished by the scandal I'd created. As their world fell apart, I continued to gather evidence, compiling a dossier of their every move. I wanted to make sure that when the time came, there would be no doubt about what they'd done. I tracked their phone calls, their texts, their emails, everything. I even followed them a few times, watching from a distance as they met in secret, oblivious to the storm that was brewing around them. Each time I saw them together, my anger grew, but so did my resolve. I was no longer the hurt, betrayed husband. I was the architect of their downfall, and I was determined to see it through to the end. One evening, I decided to take a bigger risk. I knew they were meeting at a hotel, one they'd used before. I waited until they were inside, then slipped into the lobby, pretending to be a guest. I managed to get a room on the same floor, close enough to hear their voices through the walls. I recorded everything, their laughter, their whispers, their promises to each other. It was sickening, but I forced myself to listen, to capture every moment. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. I wanted her to see the consequences of her actions, to understand the pain she'd caused. As the days turned into weeks, I began to see the effects of my plan. Her lover's wife filed for divorce, taking their children with her. His career was in shambles, his reputation destroyed. And my wife, she was starting to crack under the pressure. She became more paranoid, more secretive, as if she could sense that someone was watching her. She started questioning me, accusing me of being distant, of hiding something. I played along, acting as though I was the one with something to hide, all while continuing to gather evidence. Finally, the time came to make my move. I had everything I needed: photos, recordings, documents, all neatly organized and ready to be used. I sent an anonymous tip to the police, detailing her involvement in her lover's murder. I knew it was a risky move, but I was willing to take the chance. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her betrayal, to understand the consequences of her actions. And when the police came knocking on our door, I was ready. I watched as they dragged her away, her face pale with shock and fear. She screamed my name, begging me to tell them it was a mistake. But I just stood there, silent and unmoving. She didn't know the truth, that I had orchestrated it all. The evidence, the anonymous tip, the damning trail that led straight to her. She thought she was being punished for her lover's murder, but in reality, she was being punished for betraying me. As the door slammed shut behind her, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. Justice had been served, but at what cost? The police came in the dead of night, their sirens shattering the silence of our quiet neighborhood. I had been waiting for this moment, anticipating it with a mix of dread and grim satisfaction. When the pounding on the door started, I didn't flinch. I knew exactly what was coming. I opened the door to find two officers standing there, their faces stern and unreadable. They asked for her by name, and I stepped aside, gesturing for them to come in. She was in the living room, curled up on the couch with her phone in hand, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit her. When they entered the room, her head snapped up, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. The officers wasted no time. They read her rights, their voices cold and detached, and then they cuffed her. She screamed my name, her voice breaking as she begged me to tell them it was a mistake. But I just stood there, silent and unmoving, my face a mask of feigned shock and disbelief. Inside, though, I felt nothing but a cold, calculating satisfaction. This was the moment I had been working toward, the culmination of weeks of planning and manipulation. She thought she was being punished for her lover's murder, but in reality, she was being punished for betraying me. As they dragged her out of the house, I followed at a distance, watching as they shoved her into the back of the police car. Her face was pale, her eyes wild with panic, and for a brief moment, I almost felt a flicker of pity. But then I remembered the texts, the photos, the recordings, all the evidence of her betrayal, and any sympathy I might have felt evaporated. She had made her choices, and now she would have to live with the consequences. The neighbors had started to gather, drawn by the commotion, and I could hear their whispers as they watched the scene unfold. I kept my head down, playing the part of the devastated husband, but inside, I was already thinking ahead. I knew this was just the beginning. The trial, the media attention, the public scrutiny, it was all part of the plan. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her actions, to understand the pain she had caused me, and I wanted the world to see her for what she really was. Back inside the house, I sat down on the couch, the same spot where she had been just moments before, and let out a long, shaky breath. The house felt eerily quiet now, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. I reached for the glass of wine I had been drinking earlier and took a sip, my hands steady despite the chaos that had just unfolded. I knew I should have felt something: relief, guilt, even anger, but all I felt was emptiness. It was as if the fire that had been burning inside me for weeks had finally burned out, leaving nothing but ashes in its wake. I thought about the evidence I had planted, the anonymous tip I had sent to the police, the careful way I had manipulated the situation to ensure she would take the fall. It had been a risky move, but it had paid off. She was behind bars now, and I was free. Free from her lies, her betrayal, her constant presence in my life. But as I sat there in the silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost something too. Not just her, but a part of myself. The part that had once believed in love, in trust, in the possibility of a happy ending. I knew I couldn't stay in the house. It was too full of memories, too full of her. So I grabbed my coat and headed out into the night, walking aimlessly through the empty streets. The cool air helped clear my head, but it couldn't erase the thoughts that kept swirling in my mind. I thought about the trial, about how she would plead her innocence, about how she would try to turn the tables on me. But I wasn't worried. I had covered my tracks too well. There was no way she could connect me to the evidence, to the anonymous tip, to the carefully constructed web of lies that had landed her in jail. As I walked, I thought about the future. I knew this wasn't over, not yet. There would be court appearances, media interviews, maybe even a book deal. People would want to know the story, and I would give it to them, just not the whole story. They would see me as the victim, the wronged husband who had been betrayed by his cheating wife. And she would be the villain, the woman who had destroyed her own life and the lives of those around her. By the time I got back to the house, the sun was starting to rise, casting a pale light over the empty streets. I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the place that had once been our home, and felt a strange sense of detachment. It was just a house now, a shell of what it had once been. And I was just a man who had played his part to perfection. But as I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, I couldn't help but wonder, had I won or had I lost the moment I decided to play this twisted game? Now she sits in a cell, waiting for a trial that will seal her fate. The media has already painted her as the villain, the cheating wife who murdered her lover in a fit of jealousy. The headlines are brutal, the public opinion even more so. Every day, I see her face splashed across the news, her eyes hollow and haunted, and I can't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. She thought she could destroy me, but in the end, it was her life that fell apart. And yet, as I sit here alone in the house we once shared, I can't shake the feeling that something is missing. The silence is deafening, the emptiness suffocating. I thought revenge would bring me peace, but all it's brought me is more pain. I've been following the case closely, reading every article, watching every news segment. The evidence against her is overwhelming: photos, recordings, even a witness who claims to have seen her arguing with her lover the night he was killed. It's all there, neatly packaged and presented to the public as proof of her guilt. But I know the truth. I know that the evidence was planted, the witness paid off, the entire case built on lies. And yet, I can't bring myself to feel guilty. She betrayed me, destroyed our marriage, and left me with nothing but anger and bitterness. If anyone deserves to suffer, it's her. But as the days turn into weeks, I find myself questioning everything. Was this really the right thing to do? Did I go too far? I try to push the doubts aside, to remind myself of the pain she caused me, but they keep creeping back in. I see her face in my dreams, her eyes pleading with me to tell the truth, to set her free. And every time I wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, my mind spinning, I tell myself it's just guilt, just the remnants of the man I used to be. But deep down, I know it's more than that. It's the realization that I've become someone I don't recognize. Someone capable of cold, calculated cruelty. I've started avoiding the news, the constant reminders of what I've done. But it's impossible to escape. Everywhere I go, people are talking about the case, speculating about her motives, her guilt, her punishment. I hear snippets of conversation in coffee shops, in grocery stores, on the street. They all think they know the truth, but they don't. They don't know about the texts, the photos, the recordings. They don't know about the pain she caused me, the betrayal that drove me to this. And they don't know about the lies, the manipulation, the carefully constructed web of deceit that landed her in jail. I've started to wonder what will happen when the trial begins. Will she try to defend herself, to plead her innocence? Or will she accept her fate? Knowing that there's no way out, I've thought about what I would do if she somehow managed to prove her innocence. If the truth came out, would I step forward, admit what I've done, or would I let her take the fall, knowing that it would destroy her life but save my own? I don't know. I don't know if I'm capable of that kind of sacrifice, of that kind of honesty. The house feels emptier than ever, the walls closing in on me. I've started sleeping in the guest room, unable to bear the thought of lying in the bed we once shared. Everywhere I look, I see reminders of her favorite chair, her books on the shelf, her clothes still hanging in the closet. I've thought about getting rid of it all, about erasing every trace of her from my life, but I can't bring myself to do it. It's as if getting rid of her things would mean admitting that she's really gone, that what we had is truly over. I've started to wonder if I'll ever be able to move on, to find some kind of peace. Revenge was supposed to bring me closure, but all it's done is leave me with more questions, more doubts. I thought I wanted her to suffer, to feel the pain she caused me, but now I'm not so sure. Seeing her behind bars, her life in ruins, doesn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. Instead, it just makes me feel hollow, empty, as if I've lost something I can never get back. I've started to think about the future, about what comes next. Will I be able to rebuild my life, to find happiness again, or will I always be haunted by what I've done, by the choices I've made? I don't know. All I know is that I'm tired of the lies, the manipulation, the constant weight of guilt. I just want it to be over, to find some kind of resolution, some kind of peace. But as I sit here in the silence, staring at the walls of the house that once felt like a home, I can't help but wonder, did I win, or did I lose the moment I decided to play this twisted game?